The shouting echoed across the indoor training pool long before the first whistle blew. 79-year-old Thomas Tom Walker slowly walked along the edge of the Naval Special Warfare Aquatic Training Facility in Coronado, California, carrying a faded canvas duffel bag and wearing an old Navy sweatshirt that had clearly seen better days. His gray hair was damp from the morning mist outside, and an old knee injury gave him a noticeable limp. A group of young special operations candidates hurried past him, carrying fins and dive gear. One nearly bumped into the elderly man before laughing loudly. "Move aside, Grandpa." Another candidate pointed toward the Olympic-sized pool and grinned. "Careful, we don't want you falling in." The group burst into laughter. Tom simply stepped aside, smiled politely, and wished them good luck. Every year, on the same autumn morning, he visited the Aquatic Training Center for exactly one reason. He sat quietly in the top row of the bleachers, watched the water for a while, drank a cup of black coffee, and left before lunchtime. Most people assumed he was just another retired veteran with fond memories. Only a handful of instructors knew the truth. 45 years earlier, Master Chief Thomas Walker had set the underwater endurance and rescue record that every Navy Special Operations swimmer had tried and failed to break ever since. More importantly, the record existed because of a decision that had saved an entire training class during a catastrophic pool accident. A story known only to a few senior instructors. As Tom reached the bleachers, Chief Aquatic Instructor Marcus Hale noticed him immediately. Without hesitation, Marcus walked across the pool deck, came to attention, and saluted the elderly visitor. Every instructor standing nearby instinctively followed. More than 100 candidates stopped talking at once. None of them understood why the toughest instructors on the base had just saluted an old man carrying nothing but a worn duffel bag. Within the next hour, the candidates would discover why Thomas Walker's name still hung above the deepest training pool after nearly half a century, uncover the heartbreaking reason he returned every year to the same seat overlooking the water, and realize that the quiet old man they had nearly pushed aside had once completed a rescue no one else believed was humanly possible. Every October, at exactly 6:15 on a cool Thursday morning, Thomas Tom Walker walked through the front entrance of the Naval Special Warfare Aquatic Training Center in Coronado, California. He never arrived early. He was never late. At 79 years old, he still followed time with the same precision that had guided him through thousands of underwater training dives decades earlier. A faded canvas duffel bag rested over one shoulder, while an old knee injury forced him to lean slightly on a polished wooden cane whenever he crossed long hallways. The young candidates rarely noticed him for more than a few seconds. Their attention remained fixed on fins, oxygen equipment, stopwatches, and the brutal morning training waiting inside the pool. Tom preferred it that way. He quietly nodded to the receptionist, smiled at the maintenance workers who already knew his routine, and slowly climbed the bleachers until he reached the highest seat overlooking the entire pool. It was always the same seat. No one else ever used it on Thursdays. Chief Aquatic Instructor Marcus Hale spotted him almost immediately from the opposite side of the facility. "Morning, Master Chief," Marcus called respectfully. Tom smiled and lifted one hand. "Morning, Marcus. Coffee?" "Already brought mine." Marcus laughed. "You never change. Neither does the water." Several younger instructors overheard the conversation but said nothing. They had long since learned that when Tom Walker visited, the morning somehow felt different. The pool itself seemed quieter, more respectful. Below the bleachers, more than 100 special operations candidates lined up along the edge of the Olympic-sized training pool, waiting for instructions. Most were exhausted after a night of surf drills and timed ocean swims. One young candidate glanced toward the old man sitting high above them. "Who's Grandpa?" Another shrugged. "Probably somebody's retired swim coach." A third laughed. "Looks like he got lost on the way to the senior center." Several nearby candidates joined the laughter. Tom heard every word. He simply smiled into his steaming cup of black coffee and looked across the perfectly still water. Marcus Hale heard the jokes as well but chose not to react. Experience had taught him that respect forced by authority never lasted. Respect discovered through truth remained forever. The morning briefing began. Marcus addressed the candidates with his usual calm voice. "Today you'll begin underwater confidence drills." Groans spread across the formation. Everyone knew what that meant. Long underwater swims, breath-holding exercises, buddy rescues, equipment recovery, controlled stress beneath the surface. Some candidates feared those drills more than Hell Week itself. Marcus continued. Remember one thing. He pointed toward the pool. The water doesn't care how strong you are. One candidate answered confidently. Then what does it care about? Marcus smiled faintly. Whether you panic. The whistle sounded. Candidates rushed to retrieve masks, fins, and weight belts from the equipment racks. In the confusion, one impatient trainee nearly collided with Tom as the old man slowly descended the stairs toward the pool deck to refill his coffee. Move, old man, the trainee shouted without slowing down. Another laughed. Careful, Grandpa. These stairs are faster than you are. More laughter echoed across the natatorium. Tom calmly stepped aside. Good luck today, he said kindly. You'll need it. The trainee grinned. Don't worry about us. He looked at Tom's cane. Maybe save some luck for yourself. Tom simply nodded. Fair enough. Marcus watched the exchange from across the pool without saying a word. A few minutes later, the candidates began their first underwater evolution. One after another, they struggled to remain calm, while instructors simulated equipment failures beneath the surface. Some surfaced too early. Others lost orientation in the deep end. A few failed before the first drill had even ended. Tom quietly observed every movement from the top row. Occasionally he smiled. Occasionally he gently shook his head. Marcus eventually climbed the bleachers carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee. See anything interesting? Tom accepted one gratefully. They're trying to fight the water. Marcus nodded knowingly. You always said that. Tom looked toward the struggling candidates below. Water isn't an opponent. Then what is it? Marcus smiled because he already knew the answer. Tom took a slow sip before replying. It's a teacher. Just then, an announcement echoed through the loudspeakers. Attention all candidates. Before today's final evaluation begins, we will recognize a special guest. Confused whispers spread throughout the pool. Marcus looked at Tom with a quiet smile. You ready? Tom sighed softly. I was hoping you'd forgotten. Marcus laughed. Not this year. Down on the pool deck, the impatient trainee who had told Tom to move earlier glanced up at the old man one last time and whispered to his friend, Watch. They're probably giving him a lifetime membership. His friend chuckled. Neither of them noticed the large bronze plaque hanging high above the deepest end of the pool. Across the top, in bold engraved letters, it read, Master Chief Thomas Walker Underwater Endurance Record, still unbroken. None of the young candidates had ever looked up long enough to read it. As Tom reached the pool deck, Marcus came to attention and rendered a sharp salute. Every aquatic instructor immediately followed. Several senior divers standing near the deep end did the same. The candidates looked around in confusion. Who is he? Someone whispered. Marcus turned toward the formation. Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Master Chief Thomas Walker, United States Navy, retired. A few candidates politely nodded, but the name meant little to them. Marcus smiled faintly. That's understandable. He pointed toward the far wall above the deepest part of the training pool. Look up. For the first time that morning, every candidate lifted their eyes toward the large bronze plaque hanging high above the water. Master Chief Thomas Walker, underwater endurance record still unbroken. A wave of murmurs spread through the room. One trainee frowned. That's his record? Marcus nodded. 45 years ago. Another candidate asked. How long has nobody broken it? 45 years. Silence followed. Impossible, someone whispered. Marcus smiled. Many people have tried. One of the candidates who had laughed at Tom earlier stepped forward. Sir, what exactly is the record? Marcus looked toward Tom before answering. Continuous underwater rescue evolution while carrying full operational gear. Several trainees exchanged confused looks. How long? Marcus replied quietly. Long enough that we eventually stopped measuring how tired he was and started counting how many lives he was saving. Tom shook his head gently. Marcus, they deserve to know. Tom smiled politely but remained silent. Marcus continued. Every rescue instructor who has worked in this facility has attempted to match that performance. He glanced toward the plaque. None of us have. One trainee looked at Tom's cane. How does someone like him do that? Tom chuckled softly. Not anymore. Marcus answered instead. You're looking at age. He pointed toward Tom. I'm looking at 40 years of discipline before age ever arrived. The candidates became noticeably quieter. Tom slowly unzipped his faded canvas duffel bag. Several expected him to remove old medals or photographs. Instead, he carefully lifted out a pair of worn black swim fins The rubber had faded from decades of use, and several repairs were visible along the straps. One young candidate laughed nervously. "Those belong in a museum." Tom smiled. "Probably. Why keep using them?" Tom ran one hand gently across the scratched surface. "Because they already know the way." Marcus smiled knowingly, still carrying the same fins. "They've never let me down." One instructor standing nearby quietly added. "Neither has he." A candidate raised his hand. "Master Chief." Tom looked at him kindly. "Yes?" "If your record has lasted 45 years, he hesitated. "Why don't they retire it?" Tom smiled before Marcus could answer. "Because records aren't meant to be protected. Then why is yours still standing?" Tom looked across the perfectly calm water. Maybe nobody's learned the lesson yet. Several candidates looked puzzled. Marcus folded his arms. "You'll understand soon enough." Just then, the maintenance staff rolled a large steel platform toward the deepest section of the pool. Heavy rescue equipment, weighted dummies, ropes, masks, and underwater breathing gear were arranged exactly as they had been decades earlier. The candidates looked at the unusual setup. "What's happening?" Marcus smiled. "Today," he looked toward Tom. "You're going to see the evolution that created the record." Tom quietly shook his head. "Marcus, I don't need to prove anything." Marcus nodded respectfully. "I know." He looked back at the candidates. "This demonstration isn't about proving what Master Chief Walker can still do." He paused. "It's about showing you why his name has never come off that wall." The entire natatorium fell silent as Tom slowly placed the old swim fins on the edge of the pool. For the first time that morning, not a single candidate laughed. They had finally begun to realize that the quiet old man they had nearly pushed aside was about to teach them something no stopwatch could ever measure. The loudspeaker clicked once more, and the entire natatorium gradually fell silent. Chief Aquatic Instructor Marcus Hale stepped to the center of the pool deck and looked toward the highest row of bleachers. "Master Chief Walker," he called warmly, "would you join us?" Tom sighed with a small smile, set down his coffee, picked up his worn duffel bag, and slowly made his way down the concrete steps. More than 100 candidates watched with mild curiosity. Most still had no idea why the instructors seemed to know the elderly visitor so well. The entire natatorium stood in complete silence as Thomas Walker slowly knelt beside the edge of the deepest training pool. He carefully slipped on the same worn swim fins he had carried for decades. Every buckle was checked twice. Every strap rested exactly where it belonged. There was nothing hurried about his movements. Marcus Hale looked toward the candidates. "Watch his preparation." One trainee whispered, "He's taking forever." Marcus quietly smiled. "No, then what?" "He's eliminating every excuse for making a mistake." Tom stood, adjusted the old dive mask resting around his neck, and looked across the calm surface of the water. "How deep is the pool today?" he asked. 50 feet, Marcus replied. Tom nodded once. Just like before, the candidates exchanged puzzled looks. Marcus turned toward them. "The demonstration you'll see is only a shortened version of the original evolution." "Why?" someone asked. Marcus looked at Tom for a moment before answering. "Because the original should never have happened." Confused murmurs spread through the room. Tom slowly stepped onto the platform overlooking the deep end. He looked down into the crystal-clear water as though greeting an old friend. "Still beautiful," he whispered. Marcus handed him a weighted rescue dummy, weighing nearly 100 pounds. Tom smiled. "Heavier than I remember." "You're older." "So is he." Laughter gently rippled through the room. Marcus raised one hand for silence. "Underwater rescue demonstration begins now." Tom took one slow breath and entered the water with almost no splash. The candidates leaned forward immediately. Even at 79, his movements beneath the surface looked astonishingly smooth. There was no wasted motion. Every kick carried him farther than seemed possible. He reached the bottom, secured the rescue dummy, and calmly began ascending. Halfway to the surface, Marcus suddenly raised another hand. Mask failure. One instructor immediately pulled the mask from Tom's face. Using a safety line prepared for the demonstration, several candidates gasped. Tom never panicked. He simply closed his eyes, adjusted his grip on the dummy, and continued upward exactly as though nothing had happened. He surfaced calmly beside the pool wall. Applause began, but Marcus lifted one hand again. Not finished. Tom quietly replaced the mask. "Again?" Marcus nodded. "Again." This time, 2 weighted dummies waited on the bottom. Tom smiled faintly. "You're getting ambitious." You always told us training should be harder than reality. Tom chuckled softly. I did say that. Once more, he disappeared beneath the surface. The candidates watched in complete silence as the elderly Master Chief reached the bottom, secured both rescue dummies, and carefully positioned them for ascent without rushing a single movement. One candidate whispered, "How is he staying so calm?" Marcus answered without taking his eyes off the water. Because panic wastes oxygen. Tom surfaced carrying both dummies to the edge of the pool. Even now, his breathing remained steady. The younger candidate stared in disbelief. That alone is incredible, someone murmured. Marcus slowly shook his head. Compared to 45 years ago, he looked toward Tom with quiet admiration. This is barely a warm-up. The room fell silent again. One trainee finally asked the question everyone was thinking. What really happened? Marcus looked across the pool before answering. During a training evolution decades ago, an equipment malfunction trapped several candidates underwater at the same time. Every face turned toward him. Visibility disappeared. Communications failed. Divers became tangled in safety lines. He paused. For a few terrible minutes, nobody knew exactly where everyone was. The candidates listened without moving. Marcus pointed toward Tom, who was quietly removing his fins at the pool's edge. He went back under. Once? A trainee asked. Marcus shook his head. Again, and again, and again. He smiled faintly. Nobody counted how many dives he made until afterward. Complete silence filled the natatorium. Tom calmly placed the old fins back inside the faded canvas bag. Marcus nodded respectfully. I'm almost finished. He looked back at the candidates. When the last diver reached the surface alive, the medical team realized something extraordinary. He pointed toward the bronze plaque high above the deep end. Master Chief Walker had completed the longest continuous underwater rescue evolution ever recorded in this facility. No one applauded. No one even spoke. They simply looked at the quiet old man standing beside the pool, finally understanding that the record hanging above the water had never been about endurance. It had always been about bringing everyone home. The natatorium remained silent long after Marcus Hale finished speaking. The candidates looked at Thomas Walker with entirely different eyes now. The old man quietly dried his hands with a towel before placing the worn swim fins back inside the faded canvas duffel bag. He treated them with the same care someone might give a treasured family photograph. One young candidate finally gathered the courage to ask, Master Chief, if everyone survived that day, why do you see four answering? Because not everyone did. The room fell silent again. Till come back every year? Tom's smile faded gently. He looked across the still water bee. Marcus slowly lowered his head. He had heard the story many times, yet it never became easier. Tom rested both hands on his cane. During the rescue, every trainee made it back to the surface. He paused, but one instructor didn't. Several candidates exchanged confused looks. What happened? Tyler asked quietly. Tom looked toward the deepest end of the pool. Chief Petty Officer David Collins stayed underwater, helping me untangle the last two candidates. His voice remained calm, but sadness rested behind every word. He pushed one of them toward me. Tom closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then the overhead training platform collapsed into the water. Gasps spread through the room. The impact trapped David beneath a steel support frame. No one moved. I tried to free him. Tom's voice grew quieter. He ordered me to leave. One trainee whispered, "You didn't want to." Tom slowly shook his head. "No." What did he say? Tom looked toward the ceiling as though hearing his friend's voice once more. He looked at me and smiled. A faint smile appeared on Tom's own face through the sadness. He said, "Tom, they're breathing because of you. Don't waste that." Silence filled every corner of the building. I argued. Tom laughed softly at the memory. He always hated when I argued. Marcus smiled through moist eyes. He won. Tom nodded, like he usually did. He took a slow breath. By the time rescue crew lifted the platform, he gently lowered his eyes. David was gone. No one spoke. The only sound inside the enormous building was the quiet movement of water against the pool walls. Marcus finally stepped beside Tom. That's why the record still stands. The candidates looked confused. Marcus continued. Every instructor who has tried to break it eventually stops. Why? Someone asked. Marcus pointed toward the deep end. Because they eventually realized the record was never about staying underwater the longest. He looked at Tom. It was about refusing to come up while someone else still needed you. Tears quietly filled several candidates' eyes. One young man who had shouted at Tom to move aside earlier slowly walked forward. "Master Chief." Tom looked at him kindly. "Yes?" The candidate lowered his head. "I'm sorry." Tom smiled warmly. "For what?" "For thinking you were just an old man." Tom gently rested one hand on the young candidate's shoulder. "So?" He glanced toward the pool. "Someday, if you stay in this profession long enough," he paused, "you'll become the old man too." The candidate smiled sadly. "I hope I earn it." Tom nodded. "That's the right answer." Just then, Marcus signaled to one of the instructors standing near the equipment room. The instructor returned, carrying a large framed photograph protected beneath glass. It showed a group of exhausted Navy swimmers standing beside the pool nearly half a century earlier. In the center stood a young Thomas Walker and a broad-shouldered man with a wide grin resting one arm across Tom's shoulders. "That's David," Tom said softly. Tyler stepped closer. "He looks happy." Tom smiled. "He always was." Beneath the photograph, engraved on a small brass plate, were words written by Chief Petty Officer David Collins shortly before the accident. "The purpose of learning to stay underwater is never to prove how long you can hold your breath. It is to make sure someone else gets another one." No one looked away from those words. For the first time, every candidate understood that the greatest record hanging above the pool had never been measured in minutes. It had been measured in sacrifice. The story of what happened that morning spread quietly through the Naval Special Warfare community. There was no press conference, no interviews, no official announcement. It traveled the same way the most meaningful stories always do, from one instructor to another, from one graduating class to the next. Soon, every new group of special operations candidates arriving at the Aquatic Training Center asked the same question before their first underwater evolution: who was Thomas Walker? Marcus Hale always smiled before answering, "If you're patient, he'll teach you himself." From that year forward, Tom began visiting the pool every Saturday morning, instead of only once each October 7 to ACE. No schedule announced his presence. No attendance was mandatory. Yet long before sunrise, every seat in the bleachers was filled. The candidates expected stories about impossible endurance records and classified missions beneath the sea. Instead, Tom walked to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and wrote 3 simple sentences. "The water is never your enemy. Panique is. Your teammate comes before your stopwatch." He spent the next 2 hours talking very little about swimming and almost entirely about trust. "The strongest diver," he often said, "isn't the one who stays underwater the longest." He smiled gently. "It's the one everyone else wants beside them when something goes wrong." Those words slowly became part of the culture inside the training center. Instructors repeated them during rescue drills. Candidates wrote them inside waterproof notebooks. Some even taped them inside their lockers before every training cycle. The young candidate who had shouted, "Move aside, Grandpa," became one of Tom's closest students. His name was Tyler Morgan. Several years later, Tyler returned to Coronado wearing the insignia of a rescue instructor. Before teaching his very first class, he climbed to the top row of the bleachers carrying a cup of black coffee. Marcus smiled when he saw him. "Keeping a tradition?" Tyler nodded. "I finally understand why he always sat up here." Marcus looked across the quiet pool. "What do you see?" Tyler smiled. "Everyone who still has something to learn." Tom laughed softly. "Now you're ready to teach." As the years passed, the Naval Special Warfare Command officially renamed the annual underwater rescue evaluation. Tom objected immediately. "Don't name it after me." Marcus folded his arms. "Too late." Tom sighed. "Marcus, come with me." They walked together to the deepest end of the pool. A new bronze plaque had been installed beneath the original endurance record. It read, "The Walker Collins Underwater Rescue Challenge." Tom stood quietly for a long time. Marcus smiled. "You always said you never earned that record alone." Tom slowly reached out and touched David Collins' name engraved beside his own. "Now it's finally correct." Many years later, when Thomas Walker passed away peacefully at the age of 88, the Aquatic Training Center closed for one morning. Hundreds of active duty operators, instructors, rescue swimmers, veterans, and Gold Star families gathered silently around the deep end of the pool. Marcus Hale carried Tom's faded canvas duffel bag to the water's edge. Inside were the same worn swim fins, the old dive mask, and a folded towel that had accompanied Tom every year for nearly half a century. Rather than placing them inside a museum, Marcus positioned the bag beneath the Walker Collins plaque, exactly where Tom had always left it before entering the water. Beside it rested a simple bronze inscription. A true rescue swimmer is remembered not by how long he stayed beneath the surface, but by how many others lived, because he refused to leave it. From that day forward, every special operations candidate entering the natatorium paused before beginning underwater training. They looked first at the old fins, then at the names of Walker and Collins, and finally at the still water waiting before them. Most believed they were preparing to learn endurance. In truth, they were preparing to learn something far more important. They were learning that courage is never measured by how long we can hold our breath. It is measured by how willingly we spend it for someone else. Water has never cared about rank, age, medals, or reputation. It treats every person exactly the same. The moment we enter it, pride disappears, excuses lose their value, and only discipline, preparation, and character remain. Perhaps that is why so many of life's greatest lessons can be found beneath the surface. Thomas Walker understood those lessons better than most. He never returned to the training pool to remind anyone that he once held an unbroken record. He returned because every visit allowed him to remember a teammate who gave everything so that others could breathe another day. The water became more than a place of training. It became a place of gratitude. David Collins also left behind a lesson that could never be measured with a stopwatch. His final decision proved that the purpose of mastering difficult skills is never personal glory. We train harder so that when another life depends on us, hesitation no longer exists. Every rescue swimmer, every first responder, every soldier, every firefighter, every police officer, and every ordinary person who chooses someone else's safety before their own continues the legacy that David left behind. The young candidates made the same mistake many of us make throughout life. They looked at a cane instead of the miles it had traveled. They saw worn swim fins instead of the lives they had helped save. They saw an elderly man moving slowly and assumed his greatest days were over. Then they discovered that wisdom often walks more slowly than youth, but it almost always arrives farther. Thomas often reminded his students that the water is never the enemy. Panik is. That truth reaches far beyond swimming pools and military training. Fear, anger, pride, and impatience cause far more people to sink than difficult circumstances ever do. The calmer we become, the more clearly we can see the way forward. That lesson belongs to every family, every workplace, every classroom, and every challenge life places before us. The most powerful moment in this story was never the salute from the instructors or the unbroken record hanging above the pool. It was the quiet realization that the record existed because one man refused to leave the water while someone else still needed help, and another man gave his own future so everyone else could have one. Some records deserve to stand forever, not because no one is capable of breaking them, but because everyone who understands their true meaning no longer wants to. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever known a mentor, teammate, coach, veteran, first responder, or ordinary person whose courage quietly changed the lives of everyone around them? We'd be honored to hear your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories about veterans, sacrifice, courage, family, faith, honor, second chances, and the remarkable people whose greatest victories are measured not by what they achieved for themselves, but by the lives they protected along the way. May God bless you and your loved ones. Watch over every rescue swimmer, every service member, every first responder, and every person who willingly steps toward danger so someone else can return home safely. Comfort every family carrying memories of sacrifice. Strengthen every teacher who passes wisdom to the next generation. And remind all of us that true greatness is never found in holding a record. It is found in becoming the reason someone else gets another chance to live. And may you never forget that sometimes the strongest person in the water is not the fastest swimmer. It is the one who refuses to leave until everyone else has reached the surface.